You are listening to From Embers, a weekly show on CFRC 101.9 FM about anarchist and anti-authoritarian ideas and practice. We are broadcasting from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples on land that has come to be called Kingston, Ontario, Canada, because of the thievery and brutality of the Canadian state and its empire-loving parents. From Embers is about fires, some real and some metaphorical. Fires started generations ago and tended to over the years. Little sparks all across this territory that we hope will grow, spread, and engulf the thieving state called Canada and the capitalist system that has plagued this land since the fur trade. Today on From Embers, I wanted to talk about Canada Day, which I'm sure many of us are still recovering from in various ways. I spoke with Krista Flute, an Indigenous organizer in my hometown of Kingston, Ontario, about resistance to nationalist celebrations here over the years. Then, as far away geographically as we could get, but maybe as close historically and politically as could be, I interviewed Beau, a member of an Australia-based collective called Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance, about the strong protests that have been taking place on Invasion Day, officially known as Australia Day there, for decades.
I'm Krista Flute. I'm Lakota and Cajun from Standing Rock, and I was adopted in part of the scoop to Agadenigwe Gadaragwe in the city colonially known as Kingston.
And can you tell me a little bit about what Kingston kind of broadly is like usually on July 1st?
Well, it's a loyalist city, so it's predominantly white people who are really proud of British roots and stuff and being loyal to the Queen. And they get dressed up in red and white and call it the Red and White People Parade. And there's just thousands of people, predominantly white, in red and white, usually ugly, like Canada Day shirts from the dollar store, and face paint and stuff, walking down the street. And
can you tell me about what opposition has looked like for the last 3 years, maybe sort of in order?
Okay, so 1 year we went down and came out into the middle of the parade route, and we burned a flag on the street corner, and they were all pretty horrified, and there was a cop there, and they wanted the cop to do something, but you can legally burn a flag, so it just happened, and we walked away pretty, smoothly. It went really pretty smooth. And people were angry. There was a lot of angry people in Kingston reacting over the next few days, and some nationally also. And people calling for, arrests and stuff. And it was sort of, really shows, kind of where settlers are at, because they were so angry that the flag was burned, and were calling for specifically myself, but a couple other people who they figured out who they were, to be arrested, to be beaten. There was death threats to my kids. Because, what we did was supposedly illegal. It wasn't, and deserved such a reaction. But, these people going off about how horrible and wrong and evil and everything we were, making death threats to people and children, and because we burned a fake flag. It wasn't even real because flags are fire retardant. So I sewed one because I'm really good at sewing. So I sewed a Canadian flag out of very flammable cotton.
And that sort of came in the context of a few years of opposition to Johnny MacDonald's birthday, right?
Yes.
Do you want to talk a bit about the backstory there?
So it's Kingston, and they also are big fans of the state's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. And they glorify him a lot. And they have museums and plaques and statues and places and streets named after him. And they toast him on his birthday. Like they toast a statue with wine in a ceremony. And so that there was, other protests and things. And that sort of escalated, and they stopped doing it publicly eventually. I think, actually, the year that the flag was burned, we made some statement that at John A.'s birthday protests that we were going to oppose colonial celebrations, and so Canada Day came up, and so that's how that happened.
Mm-hmm. And then the year after that was Canada 150. It was like a big year for sort of their side. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about what happened in Kingston for Canada 150?
So in Kingston for Canada 150, a bunch of activists organized. It wasn't just Indigenous people. We'd been doing a lot of things with a bunch of different people all working together. We had, I would say, 75 people turn up, and the parade comes down the main street called Princess Street, and so we started at the bottom and went up, and we were handing out like different types of handouts and mini zine and other things, and paper Canadian flags with matches taped to them that said "Burn this flag," and we were handing these out to people as we walked up Princess Street heading to meet the parade. There was 9 of us who were Indigenous, and we went and stood in front of the parade, like very directly, because they were leading it with a contingent of 6 people who were like 4 Native women and 2 of their friends. And we were trying to hand them our stuff that we'd printed up and asking them to like not continue in the parade, but to step aside and talk with us about like what this really means and the impact it has on Indigenous people. And they were swearing and yelling at us. So we stopped trying to talk with them because that was just becoming a screaming match, and we joined the rest of the people and marching up Princess, which forced like the Canada Day parade to take, instead of like the full one-way main street, to like be shoved over to half of it, and we went up the other half. Like there was no way we were probably ever going to stop the parade because there's thousands of them, but we took over like half their parade space, which I always thought was pretty awesome. The cops were pretty violent and aggressive, but we made it all the way up.
Did you get any feedback sort of afterwards? Like what was the fallout like for that?
Well, people were pretty angry. I don't know. I sort of gauge like the fallout based on like how much hate mail I get. And it wasn't as bad as the flag burning. Yeah, it wasn't as bad as the flag burning. It was mostly just people bitching and stuff like that online for several days. And they're angry. Their typical sentiments are that like we're wrong and we should be thrown in jail for this sort of stuff because it's a free country unless you're opposing Canada. Then they don't think there should be any freedom or something. Really, it's just there's settlers who are really, really, really pissed off that you've said they're racist for celebrating genocide. Mm-hmm. And their typical reactions are how proud they are of their state, but you can really stump them if you ask them like what specifically they're proud of, because I mean there's really nothing. There's this horrible colonial history and a mythology of multiculturalism created in the 60s by Trudeau Sr. Like, I don't really...
And, like, corporate coffee and hockey.
Yeah.
And, like, that's about it, yeah.
Or they might tell you, well, our people fought for freedom on this land. It's like, no, only my people ever did that. Your people just fought for conquering on this land, or they fought in other lands.
Or they'll be like, at least we don't live in a much more authoritarian state. Like, bring up various countries where people have it worse.
We aren't the U.S. It's like, well, barely.
Yeah. So people might not know this who are listening, but actually 75 people is like a pretty big protest for Kingston in recent years. So where did those people come from?
They came. I guess other people felt similar, which is a really good thing. Sometimes we get a really good crowd and sometimes we don't. Also, I think, like, if you compare Kingston to Toronto, like, and you think of the population difference, I mean, even if we get like 40 people, like, per capita, we're still really realistically doing better than Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's like a backlash to the extreme conservatism of the city.
There was also like anti-150 stuff happening sort of across the country.
Yeah.
Also online, like maybe people had sort of seen that.
Yeah, that might have really raised awareness for that. Mm-hmm. That might have really helped.
Why bother protesting Canada Day?
Because I'm just not going to let them get away with celebrating my genocide. I'm just not going to let them get away with it. I want to ruin it for them. I want to ruin their day. Because I do take it personally.
And if you could sort of identify goals in doing that, like what would they be? Like what would a victory look like in the context of the Canada Day protests?
Shutting it down. People getting it. That would be a victory if people got it, or if more people came over. Really, at this point, I think mostly the point of protest is a few things. Is to give people the opportunity to have a voice and to remember that they can have one so they can do something bigger, hopefully, to bring out enough people eventually to know that there are enough of us to do something more, and to hold space for, well, as an Indigenous person, to hold space for like all our people who don't have it in them to get out there, who are afraid, who can't, who are just too busy surviving to take something else on. So for me, that's sort of the point.
And what happened this year at the parade?
So this year we knew we were going to have less people because there had been other things going on, so organizing was late, and trying to reach out to people was late, and we knew people were going to Montreal to help out over there. Eventually a small group of us ended up doing some organizing. The plan was like to be where the parade ends and their celebration of Canada starts, which was going to begin with having people stand up and sing "O Canada." So we met them there, and I would say there was like 10 or 12 of us, and stopped them. And we were just going to keep doing that until we were eventually forced to go, and these two people who were allies were going to stay and get arrested. And we were just going to, oppose that, obviously, and be against it, and then just sort of like back off and settle down. And And then we were just going to noise interrupt O Canada Day and then leave. So we opposed it, and an Algonquin woman, Susan Delisle, opened and gave an opening, and I read the call out from the women of Six Nations, and Evelina spoke as a non-Indigenous ally, as a Black woman from an immigrant mother. And she spoke about how, she used to celebrate this stuff and what it means and why we shouldn't, and did a really great job. And, the cops weren't sure what they were doing, but they were trying to pull us away. I don't really know if they knew what they were doing, because if you see video of it, there's this one cop who's dragging a person or two away, and then eventually they leave and just walk back to the group of us, and he does that more than once. And I went and sat on the steps of City Hall with my air horn. I was just trying to think for a minute and assess what was going on, because our exit strategy was maybe not going to happen. And then I heard someone talking, so I blew my air horn to just interrupt them, someone official speaking on a microphone. So the cop came over and grabbed the air horn. And he grabbed the air horn, and I didn't really react much because I had another one in my purse. And then he just grabbed me by the arm and dragged me off. And I sort of knew it was a decision to take me. And then another activist tried to stand in front of me and hold on to me and stop them, and so the two of us got arrested, but there was no charges. We just got to the police station and were told it was an adult timeout, and we were released when all disruptible Canada Day stuff was done, pretty much. And then the city got, all the folks online got really angry at this horrible people who won't just let them celebrate genocide.
That sounds like a kind of deliberate strategy on the part of the police to target you with the hopes of shutting down the protest, would you say?
Yeah, and so it worked. They planned to sit down and then wait for O Canada Day and then disrupt that with air horns and things. Didn't happen. And so we had to talk about that the next day, some of us, about how probably the best thing to do if someone is taken away is to finish it for them. Get it done.
Do you think that in Kingston the climate is shifting at all? Do you think anyone's mind is being changed by all these actions? Are people sort of switching sides?
I really did. It has felt in with the John A. stuff and that there are people who are listening and stuff. Sometimes it's really hard to see from the inside, because those who are really opposed to what we're doing are incredibly vocal about it. And I don't know. I think with the election of Doug Ford and the general rise of the right, although we were starting to see some shift, I think we're going to see a rise in backlash, even if we see a rise in people getting it and understanding it. I think we're probably going to see a real rise in backlash. And so when the cops were dragging me off by the arm and that, there's hundreds of people in the crowd cheering. Mm-hmm. And I do have concerns that, with the rise of the right and a cheering crowd, that maybe the cops will perhaps feel like they can get away with more with how Indigenous activists and other activists are handled. I know when Idle No More started in the end of 2012, that the chief of police for Ontario put out a statement that, like, not to arrest idle and more activists in public because they were afraid of how it was going to look publicly. I think that fear is probably going to be disappearing in the next coming years. Not just because, like, an Ontario Conservative government, like, won't care. I mean, they're the same people who shot Dudley George. But I think that the portion of the population that doesn't care and wants to see those things happening feels confident in stating that. And I think my biggest concern is that I think we'll see a split between, like, over the coming years, if that is how it goes, I think we'll see a split between activists who are scared off or tamed by that and those who aren't.
What does it feel like to have there be, like, Indigenous people leading the Canada Day Parade and to be, like, facing them as, like, a group of Indigenous people yourselves?
It's awful. I hate it. It pisses me off. The class division between who you see up there and who you don't generally pisses me off usually. It helps support the lie of multiculturalism, helps support the lie that there's a nation-to-nation relationship. It helps to support all those, like, you know, bullshit liberal fluff stories that every liberal government will always tell to make themselves sound appealing. It makes me angry, but I'm just as angry when I see them on Aboriginal Day. Like, we used to have protests every year, and then one of the governments was like, oh, no more need for protests, have Aboriginal Day, which is now Indigenous Day. And, you know, they call it education and all this other stuff, but you never see anybody at Aboriginal Day or Indigenous Day talking about actual Indigenous issues, ever. It's just like this glorified Buffalo Bill show.
What are some of the issues that you feel are being left out of those kinds of narratives?
All of them. They aren't talking about the 60s scoop and ongoing scoop. They aren't talking about the school to prison pipeline. They aren't talking about man camps. They aren't talking about ships with sex slaves on them on the Great Lakes. They aren't talking about deaths in Thunder Bay. They aren't talking about missing and murdered Indigenous people. They aren't talking about continued land theft. They aren't talking about anything. They're talking about nothing. They talk about beads and teepees and feathers. And if they get political at all, they'll mention reconciliation for residential schools because they're done, as sort of. I mean, the scoop's just a continuation of it. And a lack of schools in the north mean that instead of going to residential school, kids go to boarding school, which is essentially the same thing. They're not talking about anything. They're not talking about Starlight tours. They're not talking about, you know, the imprisonment of, like, activists and journalists. They aren't talking about the cops raping Native people in Val-d'Or. Nothing. They don't talk about anything. They don't talk about extreme poverty, high incarceration rates. None of it.
Do you think there's anything that the people planning the Canada Day Parade could do to make the Canada Day Parade okay?
No. There's no such thing as nicer colonization, and there's no such thing as an acceptable way to celebrate genocide. There's no part of Canada's history where they haven't been conquering and dominating Indigenous peoples and land for profit. So, no.
What do you hope Canada Day would look like in years to come?
I would really like to stop the parade. I would really like to fully stop it, and I'd love to have, like, 100 or 200 people show up and just not let it happen and let it be a giant shit show. That's what I'd really like. I'd like it to become so much hassle that they have to do something else.
Mm-hmm. Sort of seems like that's what happened with the John A. birthday party, right? Is like they were just like increasingly outnumbered, increasingly looked silly.
Yeah.
A bunch of liberals sort of came out and were like, okay, like maybe you really shouldn't be celebrating this kind of stuff. And then eventually, like, it does seem like it's been canceled. We'll see this coming year.
Well, we thought it was canceled, actually. And so we thought it was canceled. We'd also protested a pub called Sir John's Public House because it's about John A. and it's covered in John A. memorabilia. And the asshole who owns it loves John A. MacDonald. And so he very publicly, just before John A.'s birthday, changed the name to Public House, but only on the outside sign. Like, everything's still in it. It's all still, like, he only changed the outer sign and made a public display of it. And then, like, very more quietly to the people he wanted, I invited them for a toasting of John A. inside the pub where, yeah, we didn't stop the toasting or any of that. We just ran them inside to hide.
But if Canada Day became, like, 15 old white guys drinking some whiskey, like, behind closed doors, and people were scared to bring their kids to it because it's, like, this shameful racist thing, like, that would be different
awesome.
From what it looks like now.
That would be awesome if people were ashamed to bring their kids to it. Yeah. I think before they admit that they're ashamed to bring their kids, they'll go on about how, we've ruined it for their kids.
The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly.
All is not forgotten when someone is forgiven. Words that say to soften up the hardness that I'm living in. I hate to say indifference is becoming my religion, but I haven't learned to pray in ways to satisfy tradition. When I think about identity, I think about my language. How my folks were taught it would be to my advantage. To learn a foreign tongue, they could not foresee the damage. Damn shame when it happens, you don't see it till it passes. So where's all the support for Anishinaabe Moan classes? Assimilation tactics left no room for us to practice, and I really wish I could adjust. Yeah, I really wish I could have just listen with my heart and not my ego. I was fragile, conditioned by the world to think my culture wasn't passed down, but I learned the generosity. It's in my genealogy, so fuck all the bureaucracy and keep all your apologies. I know you're sorry, but you're more lost than me. Your land's across the ocean and I'm right where I should be. And I reckon this damnation will force reconciliation down the throats of our survivors and the people it's displacing. I know you're sorry, and now you call on me to fix the broken hearts created by your policies. And these are the things that I think I know. I am but a leaf on a tree that grows its roots in the ground like a seed that's sown in the dirt of the earth is where I was born. It's where I will return when this journey ends and I've earned what I've learned. So tell me to get over it. I'm so fucking over it. Steal everything in sight and teach me about private ownership. Bleach everything you like and teach me about pride of ownership. Bleach my inherent rights and tell me that I never owned this shit. As generations pass, you'll act as if you never noticed it. While as kids committing suicide as a way out of the hopelessness, I know you're sorry. You say you're not to blame. Fill your heart to brim with guilt, but not an ounce of shame. Break branches off of family trees and tell us times have changed, but the focus of this genocide at root remains intact. So instead of killing Indian kids, why don't we kill this Indian act?
You're listening to the podcast edition of From Embers, a regular anarchist radio show based out of Kingston, Ontario.
Okay, cool. Yama I come from means hello or welcome. My name is Bo Spirum. I'm Gamilaroi Kuma Marawari. I live on Meanjin country in so-called Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. And I'm a part of Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance.
And what is Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance?
I guess Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance, like we started in 2014, early 2014, a bunch of us younger fellas, like hanging out, like we were involved in different things in our communities, different activist stuff, community stuff, and I guess we wanted to have a platform to give young fellas that don't necessarily come from political families, a space to politicize young black people. Out of the four of us that sort of had the early discussions of war, three of us went to Turtle Island, and like we just met so many amazing First Nations people, elders, young people, even non-Indigenous peoples over there. That was like really inspirational and inspiring in terms of how I guess the actions we do. But also, it's a reflection of our old people that have been fighting since 1788 against colonialism, against white supremacy that continues, to encourage, continues to, I guess, destroy our peoples or our way of life. One thing we like to say is, like, our mantra is resist, revive, decolonize. Resisting colonial oppression, reviving, language, ceremony, law, and decolonizing at every aspect, I guess we can. I have a young child at the moment. Me and my partner have a 15-month-old daughter. Her name's Nalini. That means stingray. And I guess the more that we can sort of give her, the less, I guess, colonial she'll be. Myself and my brothers and sisters, we have traditional names. We're very fortunate of that. So if I can sort of do that for my daughter, but then also impart, more language and more knowledge of where she comes from, and then also our understanding of why we're in the position we're in today. That sort of, preparing her for her journey, and that's, me fulfilling, I guess, my part in decolonizing.
And what are just a few of the actions that you've taken part in as war?
I guess one of the first would have been the G20 in Brisbane in 2014. We were all in our early 20s. We sort of launched war there as well. Invasion Day, that's all. Like the white fellas over here call it Australia Day, we call it Invasion Day or Survival Day. So each year, even before war was around, we always organised to prepare to protest that day, the 26th of January. There was there was the forced closure of Aboriginal communities. That would have been like one of the biggest mobilisations of, I guess, in the support of Aboriginal issues in the last few years, except for Invasion Day. Over the last maybe 3-4 years, Invasion has been getting massive. And then also in April this year was the Commonwealth Games. We call it the Stolenmouth Games. Now, the last 3 times Australia hosted the Commonwealth Games, in 1982 in Brisbane here. Aboriginal people protested in 2007 in Melbourne. Aboriginal people protested, and then 2018 here on the Gold Coast, about 40 minutes away from Brisbane, we protest. We've also organised other things against deaths in custody to support and to sort of get the word out about the torture of young Indigenous people in detention centres in Australia here. Lots of members that are part of war, do our own things outside of that, like language revival. We have a magazine that's been dormant for like the last few months, which is called The Black Rising, which sort of we get different Aboriginal people to sort of articulate what's going on in their communities, how they're resisting and reviving culture in their respected areas. For a while, we had a food program where we would get food from like Woolworths and Coles, like the big supermarkets, and then also from other restaurants and stuff, or not restaurants, but other like supermarket type places that were throwing up their food. Like we would grab them first and make up parcels and would deliver those to different people in and around the Brisbane area. And then also, like a lot of us, some of our members have been heavily involved in fighting to get Aboriginal young children back within their families. Like we have a thing over here called the Stolen Generation, which is similar to residential schools and the 60s Scoop. where government officials have come in and taken and forcibly adopted Aboriginal children. At this current time, at the moment, there's more Aboriginal children in out-of-home care than there was, prior to the stolen generation. And each year, that number of children that are in out-of-home care goes up by 1,000. So there was a documentary that came out. It was called After the Apology, which is a very emotional documentary, which I urge people over there to watch as well, native and non-native, to get an understanding of what's going on over here, but then also the similarities between government policies of splitting up families.
I did want to zero in a little bit on Invasion Day, just because this week is Canada Day. So we're like...
What day is Canada Day?
July 1st, so it just happened.
Oh, it happened, yeah.
So we've been sort of surrounded by like red and white flags for the past few weeks. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what the like dominant, like the non-native Australia Day sort of typically looks like in Brisbane.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's pretty similar all over the country here. It's a public holiday. I'm sure similar what goes on over there, parades, idiots dressed up in, draping themselves in like the Australian flag colours. They sometimes have a gun salute, especially where we are in Brisbane. So like where we start our Invasion Day marches on the other side of the river, where they have their Australia Day morning celebration, they do a gun salute, and then like jets will fly over the city and that there. So usually like when we have speeches and stuff, if we've started the march or like the rally side of it early, the sirens, the gunshots will go off and the jets will fly over. But yeah, it's like in the lead up, it's all you see on TV, newspapers and radios is how you spend your Australia Day, and then obviously, like I'm sure Indigenous people do over there, like we engage in like this conversation where how it's unethical, and there needs to be more education, and people need to understand, I guess, the position where Indigenous peoples come from, and why this is offensive. That you're celebrating, on the actual day that the First Fleet landed in Australia, which wasn't the first day when they actually declared us a colony. That was in 1770 when Captain Cook landed on the east coast of Australia in Queensland. He declared this a British colony, which was 8 years prior to when they actually celebrate. It's pretty much all that over the country. For me, like when I get up on that day, it sort of reminds me of going to a funeral. It's like an eerie feeling. Yeah, like when it's sort of like you can. It's just like very still, and yeah, it's I don't know how like that's how I always describe it to people. It's like when I get up that morning, it's like I'm going to a funeral. But then when I just, when I get to the Invasion Day marches, I see just all black fellows draped in black, yellow, red, the Aboriginal flag colours, ready to march and ready to be loud and proud. That's, that feeling sort of leaves me, and then I get more prideful and that there. But it was funny this year, was one of the biggest. We had about 3,000 to 5,000 here in Brisbane, which is the biggest. It's growing every year. I think 15 to 20 in Sydney. The numbers in Melbourne are saying like 40 to 60,000. Like Perth was a couple of hundred, Adelaide was a couple of hundred, and then more regional sort of small country towns were getting out protesting as well on that day. And like on this day as well, just there in Melbourne actually, in one of her speeches, she goes, Australia should burn to the ground. And then literally the media picks this up and just ran with sort of like this statement that she said, and You know, it was really like they said, you know, who she was, where she worked. So then her work was getting attacked. She was getting death threats. She had like get off Facebook. Where she worked, it was an Aboriginal organisation, and anybody that had that T-shirt on, you know, were getting abused at the shopping centres and stuff. And you know, like you could really see the side of, you know, Australia when it came to protecting their own. And especially on that day as well. And you know, like she was copping, you know, backlash for I think a month after. She was still copping it into late into February. But yeah, you know, like that's this year was one of the biggest and it's growing. But like one of the things as well is there's this sort of push to change the date, and a lot of that has come on from, I guess, you know, non-Aboriginal people and maybe sort of radical, but you could say conservative Aboriginal people to an extent, to sort of change the date, to sort of, you know, have this image that, you know, Australia's changing. It's getting on with the rest of the world, and you know, like we don't sell it. You know, it's like this really big push to try and change the date, which I think it's okay, but it's a conversation starter. But you know, a lot of us think that it should be abolished altogether. You know, there's no pride in genocide, and you know, I don't think that. You know, like there needs to. You know, I think, you know, when engaging in something like this, there should be a more open dialogue and discussion with Aboriginal people about how we feel on this day, and even if they do change it, you know, it's you know, every day is Invasion Day. You know, for our people as well.
How do you think the protests got so big?
I think it's, you know, I guess there's a few reasons. I guess one is, you know, it's sort of a newer, fresher face, I guess, in this movement as well. You know, prior, to, I guess, to war and to other young organisations here in Australia, you know, I guess taking this platform, it was always the same faces and always the same discussion or same point of view that I was coming from. Not to say that those people are bad and or what they're saying is bad or that it's not valid. Of course it is. It always has been and always will be. But I think, you know, there's a sort of a revived energy in this discussion, and there's also a massive platform as well, and I guess the new, what comes with the newer generation as well. Like a part of war, we have, you know, not just, you know, straight people, but we have, you know, non-binary, queer, and trans people involved within the war. And I think that this sort of, you know, opens up a much more dialogue in terms of the oppression of our people. It reaches much more of a circle. And also there's like this massive, I guess, sort of like around the world as well. You know, there's a sort of consciousness raising outside of, I guess, our individual selves. You know, we can sort of see different changes and why it's more, I guess, meaningful to sort of stand and support other individuals that are not just, you know, whether they're the same race as us or the same color or whether they identify the same as us, you know, being queer or trans or straight. You know, I guess first and foremost, understanding that to sort of overcome oppression, we got to understand where we're coming from. I hope to think that, you know, that's why it's more and more people are out there on the streets. But then I also think that, you know, there's a lot of sympathetic people, which is good. But then there's always that question of, is it just sympathy for the fact that, you know, it's sort of the craze now to sort of listen to Indigenous peoples, or is it they're actually sympathetic, you know, when it comes to the cause of Indigenous peoples? Yeah, I like to think that, you know, we're getting our message out to the point, you know, and that's, you know, the reasoning behind, so many numbers. But within saying that as well, like, yeah, I think, there's lots of white people are pissed off, with the current, system as well. And hopefully, that's, leading to more dialogue as well.
And what's the crowd like? Like, what kind of people turn out for the Invasion Day protests?
For starters, Aboriginal people, we only make up 3% of the population in Australia, but yet we make up, I guess on a national scale, in the prison population, we make up about 75 to 80%, 60% in some areas. When it comes to youth suicide, we're the highest, I guess, demographic in the country. When it comes to all those things, we're pretty high with them when it comes to, I guess, the general census of our people are pretty small. But, at the majority of these rallies, they're non-Indigenous peoples. And I guess it's a mix between it's the majority is younger people, because you feel there's a sense of changing in the guard in terms of how younger people are thinking nowadays. And I guess there's anarchists, there's mob, there's socialists, there's unionists, feminists, all the isms you can think of. They're all out there. We have some people rock up. A few years ago, there was a Celts. It was Celts for decolonisation. A few of them sort of organised. They came in traditional Celt outfits and stuff. It was pretty cool. Yeah, like we always get Muslim people rocking up to the rallies, and we offer them the platform to talk. Palestinian community always come along and stuff as well. The Mapuche community always comes as well. We try and give people from these different areas platforms, so our people can understand that on the grand scale of on the global arena in terms of oppression and invasion, there's many other different people around the world that are in the same positions as us. We don't try and let them take that day from us. We give them a platform so they can understand, but then also our people to sort of build this international solidarity. And then it sort of, to me, when I hear that there's people in Turtle Island that are fighting against colonialism and have the same issues as me, one, I don't feel so alone in this big world. And then two, I know that the greatest weapon against colonialism is Indigenous knowledge. And once we realise our full potential, which we all do, that's the way that we can destroy it. Colonialism, and it's always good to sort of give these other mobs platforms as well, especially on a day like that, because we're pretty fortunate in terms of still being in our country. Mapuche people, a lot of Middle Eastern people, African mob, sort of a part of this, groups of marginalised people that have had to flee from the country or were taken unwillingly from their country. And but yeah, I think it's important on those days to sort of reflect on what goes on globally, but then also bringing it home as well, to know what continues to happen here. I think there are a lot of the messages that come out of that, out of Invasion Day as well, is sort of how we, how the country moves forward. But it's funny, mainstream TV didn't really show us, but when they did, they played down on how many people were at the rallies and at the marches. I think all the marches sort of that happened on the day were outnumbered a lot of the rallies or the celebrations. In 2015, when they had the march, they actually interrupted the Australia Day parade and broke through the barriers and were marching and chanting where the official Australia Day parade was. It was looking at the footage, and it was just so funny. Just seeing mob just rip the fences away, and the cops just didn't know what to do. And then people in the crowd sort of not really knowing what's going on. Obviously there's always how sort of people want to perceive these days, but I think the thing about it, there's so much momentum and negativity coming into it and going out that it's sort of it's like re-triggering for a lot of our people here, in terms of going through that process of colonialism and having these discussions with non-Aboriginal people, getting into arguments with racists, to the point where it mentally messes a lot of us up, and then it just goes away, and then it's sort of they get to go on with their lives, but then we're here still this is just not a discussion that happens about this one day, that sort of carries on, a month before and after, the backlash and the racism and everything that comes with, I guess, we're a clear reminder that, who they really are, as so-called Australians or even Canadians, doesn't, there isn't really a meaning to it, or, it's just a construct that was created to, create, an economy, I guess, for places like England, to start, as a penal colony, to sort of bring resources back to them. That's all, the byproducts of, racism and exploitation. We're a constant reminder that, they don't actually exist, but it's a big head.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's swear, but yeah.
So here in Canada, one of the ways that our government has attempted to sort of pacify or recuperate Indigenous resistance is by inclusion and representation. So the Canada Day Parade, for example, in many cities, including my own, is led by certain Indigenous people. There's a lot of imagery of Aboriginal contents sort of in Canadian nationalism. What's the Australian government's strategy for dealing with its Aboriginal peoples?
Well, I think, there's on the smaller scale, they get Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people to sort of perform at these events. But I guess on a big national scale, their big parades, they don't really get Aboriginal people. One, because I think those Aboriginal people would do that, even though they'd be offered quite a bit of money to do those things. But I think from the standpoint of being seen by, I guess, us mob marching and protesting, that they'd feel ashamed for doing those things. But then also I think that Australia doesn't really give a damn whether they should include Aboriginal people within their celebrations. But mind you, any other event outside of those days, there's always Aboriginal people performing and presenting sort of in these government-led initiatives like the Commonwealth Games. There is always a sort of inclusion to sort of pacify Aboriginal people in events, but I don't think there's obviously individual Aboriginal people that would participate in sort of these Australia Day events, but I guess there wouldn't be an organisation or a land council, sort of that would sort of participate within these on a big national or state
Right.
sort of, perspective. Because it's a bit like, I guess over here it's like the wound is still pretty fresh in terms of for colonialism and stuff. So there's sort of this distrust, I guess, for that day. But not to say that there is lots of conservative Aboriginal people that sort of go on with that day. But yeah, like they wouldn't. I don't think there's any mob that would sort of lead their Australia Day parades or do like a welcome to country. Maybe there would be, but it wouldn't be. Yeah, like I know Brisbane doesn't have an Australia Day parade because if it did, would shut it down. I know Melbourne and Adelaide does, and I know on the last few years, mobs have shut that down.
If, say, like people stopped celebrating Australia Day, like it just became like too shameful, or perhaps some kind of like, I don't know, recognition happened, how would you like to mark the day? What would you hope would happen on Australia Day?
Yeah, like I don't think there wouldn't be a day where, we wouldn't, protest Invasion Day. If they woke up and decided tomorrow that they want to change the date, like I would still personally protest the 26th January, but not protest the day that they change it to. Because I'm sure we could, find out some dates about what's the significant, what's the significance of that date, to Aboriginal people. I think that, like there's Australia and like lots of, all countries around the world, all Western countries and non-Western countries have this thing about, proving to the world that they're not bad countries. One, by not just actually admitting to what they've done, but sort of saying, hey, no, this is, this is not right, and we're, on the track of doing the right thing, but not actually addressing sort of, issues that, that come firsthand from, state governments and, institutions, or where they perpetuate, racism and institutionalized racism, police brutality and, incarceration and all those things. I think once they're sort of like addressed, then there needs to be. Then I think Australia will be sort of ready for this discussion. I think South Africa in the early 90s was sort of on sort of going in that direction. I don't think they ever got there.
I got some natives, and here's what they telling me. They'd rather be selling D or committing some felonies than be out to this praying, cause to them that be hella weak. Cause we should beat them cats who did this shit to us until they bleed. Fell asleep at the wheel from here on smoking weed and pills, and everybody else are praying hope for people we should kill. Strength is kept as a secret, cause people, they ain't really doubt it. Sing and dance of power now and then keep it up in the houses. What you afraid of? Our natives who dying slow, so scared we hit the easiest target and fight our own. But go ahead and come after me, cause I'm after them. But first go out to look around and see what's still happening, cause I can't watch these kids die and then lie like I give a fuck and not do a fucking thing, but lie down like I given up. So get a gun if you ready. We gripping on the machete for anybody involved. We got a problem forgetting where you at. Where you motherfuckers been? We on the front lines, walking with the dead. Where you motherfuckers been? We on the front line, walking with the dead. Kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all.
We stay running, gunning, bucking for the struggle, scrapping for our dignity till we bloody up these knuckles. Our protectors got power, power flowing like an ancient stream. Yeah, they be ghosting violators like it's the fucking routine. Now this savage path to freedom might be seeming extreme, but I ain't losing one more soul to the boozer amphetamine. See, when I was a youngster, almost lost my fucking mind. Didn't recognize my purpose, didn't value this life. Propaganda almost had me convinced I was worthless, but if I kill myself, I'd just be doing them a service. We can never live free while this land remains stolen. Concrete muffles the earth, so it's like her breath she be holding. We can't breathe until she breathes, so you know how we be rolling. Civilization brought the